I have decided to take some inspiration from science fiction cult classic The Guyver and build myself a Guyver Unit. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Guyver initially started off as a Japanese comic book series, which then kind of grew and got fans and became a animated series by Booster Armour, which was sort of manga anime style. Not to everyone's taste, I will admit. Obviously, I know a lot of people I speak to have never even heard of the Guyver. They seem to get it confused with MacGyver, which is completely different. I kind of grew up as a kid. I liked this series, with the Japanese anime version of it. There was also a live-action movie, or a couple of live-action movies, that was released, I think it was late 80s, kind of early 90s. The first one actually features Star Wars Mark Hamill. Don't be excited, he was only a kind of small part of the movie. He wasn't actually one of the main characters. Now, I'll be honest, I have always been a huge fan of the Guyver ever since I saw it when I was a kid, basically. And I have always kind of had a desire to have what's called the Guyver Unit.
Look out! Sure, you shouldn't touch that. This must be part of some machine that blew up.
There are a couple of different variations. There's the variation which is based on the comic books and the anime / manga, and there's also the live action version. I'll be honest, I have always been a bigger fan of the manga anime version than the live action movie version of this unit. I've always wanted to build one. From a design point of view, the Guyver unit consists of three main elements. There's the internal biological organism, the protective outer casing, and the control medal, which is effectively the computer that controls the unit. I've actually started to build a wooden structure using some plywood and some offcuts of wood. Now, I didn't have any specific guidelines onto what sort of size it was, so I had to look into some reference images and videos, anything I could get my hands on really. I also watched back through the cartoons as well, and I've got quite a few shots of that as well. I worked out that it's roughly about a foot in diameter. Thickness wise, it's around about sort of 5-6 inches thick, so you can actually pick it up. And that's the sort of size that I am going for. This is actually going to be the final piece. And as you can see, it's fairly large. And it's got some wires hanging out of it because it's going to have some electronics and some lights and hopefully some sound effects as well. When I first started planning building a Guyver unit, the first thing I started to think about was the control medal in the centre of the unit. It consists of a shiny metal orb sat on top of a light ring. This is then encased in a chrome unit which is embedded into the full Guyver unit. I actually came across the perfect outer casing to the control medal when I discovered these coffee lids. I felt that this was absolutely perfect in shape and size for the dome to sit in. I then began my search for the perfect semisphere to insert into this casing. I wanted to make sure that it fits nice and snugly and looks like one complete unit. Whilst I was trying to find the perfect dome for the control medal, I even tried one of the balls from my son's ball pit. It actually fits almost perfectly. However, the plastic that's used for these is very, very flimsy, and it's subject to being dented, and it really doesn't hold up very well. So I decided against using this and went back to the drawing board. I realised that the LED bulb fits absolutely perfectly into the lid from the coffee cup, and it creates an almost perfect control medal shape. I was very, very happy with this. I decided that if I was to use an LED bulb, it might be worth creating the Guyver unit as an actual lamp that I could just plug into the wall and switch on and off. I even went as far as going to my local B&Q store and buying a lamp holder for the bulb. Now please note, B&Q don't sponsor the channel, but if anyone is watching from B&Q and you do fancy sponsoring the channel, get in touch, eh? I eventually decided against creating a Guyver unit lamp, simply because I wanted the light to be able to fade in and out, and I also wanted to include some sound effects as well, something that I wasn't going to be able to do with a simple lamp, which would just switch on and off. However, if you are interested in me creating a lamp, then please leave a comment down below, as it's a future project that I could possibly do on the channel. So, bye-bye to that. Hello to that. When I was putting together the control model, I decided that the best effect would be if I removed the dome from the LED light bulb and hot glued it into place in the coffee lid. As you can see, it fits absolutely perfectly, and it looks like one completely solid piece. Even without the hot glue, it fits really well into shape, and it takes quite a bit to remove it. Once I had finished assembling the control model, I then started to consider how I was going to light it. I initially considered using some LED lights to light up the inside of the Guyver unit. I'll be honest, I wasn't particularly happy with the lighting that they emitted. I wanted to make it glow really brightly, like it does in the anime series. However, after a random trip to my local pound shop, I discovered a 360-degree orb cob light. At only £2, I felt that this was an absolute bargain, and even if I didn't use it for this particular model, I'm sure it would come in very handy in the future. When I got it home, I disassembled it. I was very impressed to find that it contained a very small but very bright LED, which I could use for the model, and decided that this was going to be the base of the illumination for the control model. I realised I could also dim this light as well, something which you can't do with other LED bulbs. Absolutely perfect, because I wanted the light to fade in and out. In addition, it also contained a base which contains a small magnet, perfect for holding the cob light in place. I felt that this could be a really good way of completing the model and attaching it to a display case or base. Once I had finished assembling the control model and I was happy with it, I then decided that I wanted to paint it. I did have a go at this before off camera, and the results were, well, less than impressive. As you can see, the paint is pretty blotchy. I'll be honest, I left it not long enough before I started touching it, leaving big fingerprints all over it. I did try and salvage it, and unfortunately I didn't really do a very good job of it. So I'm not going to be using this one, but I'm going to be repainting the one I've just created. Having already failed miserably to paint the control model, I decided to practice before I painted the new one. I tried spraying a couple of plastic domes with the chrome spray paint and leaving them for a good 48 hours before going anywhere near them. I'll be honest, I am a lot happier with the finish on my practice test piece than I was on my original control model. It has come out really nice and shiny, it's nice and reflective, and it doesn't have any kind of imperfections like this one does. Now if you are interested, I am using the Plasticoat Brilliant Metallic Spray Paint. The reason I bought it is because I was looking for a highly polished chrome finish, and obviously the cap led me to believe that that was the kind of finish that I was going to be getting. However, having tested it, it's not as shiny as I was expecting. It's not as reflective, and it's a little bit more dull. It's not quite the effect I was looking for. Now, if you are using spray paints and you've got any experience using any kind of chrome finish that comes out a little bit better than that, please, by all means, let me know any recommendations down below in the comments. I would be interested to know if I can get something that looks more reflective and more shiny, more mirror-like. Is anything better than anything else? Let me know. And hopefully I can maybe get something a little bit better than this before I come to actually paint the model.
Sure, you shouldn't touch that. This must be part of some machine that blew up. But what is this strange thing inside? It looks like some kind of creature.
When it came to the biological side, I felt that there was two ways in which this was portrayed in previous examples of the Guyver. The animated series reminded me of maybe internal organs or intestines or worms, something that was very much alive. However, looking at the live action version, I felt that the Guyver unit was too clinical. The internal biological element seemed to just be cable, in my opinion. I felt that that wouldn't really portray something that potentially is alive. So when I designed my unit, what I wanted to do was emulate internal organs. I wanted something a little bit more natural. So what I did was I had a look online, and I found that Pinterest, for example, is a really good source of imagery. And I wanted to look at intestinal type of organs, nerves, and just general muscle kind of textures to kind of get an idea of what I wanted to create. Once I had decided how I wanted the internal element to look, I then started to look for materials that would allow me to create something that looked like I wanted it. I had several ideas of using maybe a rope or some string. However, I'll be honest, looking at it, it didn't look like anything other than rope or string. The texture, although it was interesting, didn't look like anything natural. It looked like a woven material, which wasn't going to be suitable for what I wanted it to do. I did see some corrugated tubing, which was more in line with what I wanted, and I really liked that kind of texture. However, there was very little available in the sort of size that I wanted. So I decided that I wanted to maybe try different methods, and that's where I came up with the idea of using some air drying clay. Similar to Das clay, which I've got here. I felt that I could maybe create the internal biological aspect of the Guyver unit, a natural intestinal string or long sausage or worm, using that. So I had to play around. I'll be honest, the first attempt, I don't feel it has that real kind of like texture that I'm after. I wasn't really happy with it. Then I came up with the idea of using some corrugated card and rolling the clay on that. Once I had tried that, I was actually very impressed. It turned out really, really well. And I feel that if I was to create some worms, that's definitely the way forward. Once I stuck it down, it looked really good. But the main concern I've got, well, the two main concerns I've got is, one, it will have to be glued down really, really heavily onto the unit with a layer of the clay, and that I feel could make the unit really quite heavy. I'm also concerned about when it dries, whether it cracks. It is a really good effect, and I really do think it would be effective, but I'm not sure if this is the final effect that I really want to use. Ironically, as I was working on this piece, I came across an idea in which I used my glue gun. Now, as you can see, there is some sort of almost biological shapes there, and I feel that maybe a glue gun would work. So I'm going to try something along those lines. When I tried to apply the glue from the hot glue gun, I found out that it didn't really keep its shape very well. As it dried, it tended to naturally smooth out into a puddle rather than stay as individual strands. I gave it a rub with my finger to see if I could roughen it up again. However, all I ended up with was a bit of a mess which didn't look good at all. So back to the drawing board I went. And whilst looking through some drawers in my kitchen, I actually found some spare washing line. Now, what made me consider using the washing line initially was actually the colour. It was pink, which I thought was very close to the right colour for the internal biological organism of the Guyver Unit. I set about creating another test piece using the washing line and hot glue gun. It actually worked really well, and I was very pleased with the results. Although the washing line was not ribbed like the second clay test piece that I'd produced, I felt that the combination of washing line and the globular glue from the hot glue gun actually worked better than the clay. I actually found that the washing line and hot glue was also a lot easier to apply to my test piece than I found with the clay. Once I had finished my test pieces, I also wanted to try some painting techniques as well, to see if I could create the sort of effect that I'm looking for. There was two painting techniques that I did want to try on these models. One was using an airbrush, and the other painting technique was to dry brush the model. I started with my test piece, which was created using a combination of the washing line and the hot glue gun. I felt that this was going to be more promising. However, I did feel that before I painted it, it would need to be primed. As I wasn't entirely sure which painting technique would provide the best outcome, I decided to create a second test piece, and then I primed both of them, one using black primer and one using white. I do think that certainly with the first one, I've kind of allowed a little bit too much of the glue just to kind of like peel off and that sort of thing before I have painted it. It really doesn't look particularly neat. It looks really rough, whereas with the black painted one, obviously I've done it a little bit more neater, and I do feel that that works a lot better. Although you don't initially see it, once you've actually painted it, even with a primer, you can see every nasty little bit of hot glue that sort of sticks out, and it really doesn't make the model look very good. Now, I was thinking about that, and I might use a bit of a heat gun or something like that on the model before I paint it for the actual model itself, just to make sure that all of the glue is kind of smooth rather than jaggy out, sticky out bits. As I want to try two different painting techniques on two different colours, rather than creating another couple of test pieces, I thought I may as well just use some masking tape and mask up just half the model, and that way I can compare them side by side. It's not ideal, especially considering that the model is obviously 3D and it's not going to mask properly. If I was really bothered about it, I could take some more time, use some liquid mask and actually work on it properly, but considering these are only really small test pieces, I'm not really that bothered. Starting on the test pieces I had created using the washing line and hot glue, I decided a dry brush technique would be an ideal place to begin. From a selection of several paints that I thought would be suitable, I started to paint the test piece using some amethyst acrylic paint. I liked the colour and I felt it was fairly close to what I wanted. By applying a tiny amount of paint to the brush, then using a cloth to wipe off the excess, I was able to cover the highlights of the model test pieces in the amethyst paint. I then went back over the model using a rose pink acrylic paint to give some extra texture and shading. After the initial dry brush, I definitely feel that the black primer works best. The purple seems to cover it really nicely, and although you can't really see it in the light on the camera, it does actually look really effective. With the white primer, however, I don't feel that this works anywhere near as effective. The colours on top are just too vibrant. It's not the effect I'm looking for. I definitely feel that black primer is the colour choice that I should be using before I come to paint it. However, before I made my final decision, I thought that I should have some fun experimenting with my airbrush. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't quite have the colours that I wanted to use for this. The closest I've got is a rust colour. hull red. I may mix it with some white as well, just to get the effect that I'm wanting. Once I'd finished painting the test pieces, I then went on and just used the rest of the paint that I had left in the airbrush and painted over the models that I'd made with the clay. It was more of a test really, just to see how well the clay was going to take. I didn't really put much effort into it. Just generally, overall, the clay wasn't really giving me anywhere near the aesthetic kind of qualities that I was looking for. I felt that the material could end up being quite brittle and fragile, and I wanted a fairly hard wearing unit that I could pick up and move around without having to worry about chunks chipping off or bits breaking. So I decided against using that. Even now, several weeks later, when I look back at my test pieces, I still feel that the glue gun and washing line is more organic than what I've achieved with my clay. I feel that this matches the internal biological organisms of what a Guyver unit is. So therefore I've decided that this is going to be the method that I use for my final piece. As a final test, I decided to go to my local boys store here in the UK, and I bought myself a couple of Vallejo model colour acrylic paints, one in purple and one in royal purple. To the untrained eye, they do look the same shade, and they actually look the same shade as the amethyst. However, I wanted to try and get the sort of purple shades that was featured in the Manga cartoon, and I thought I'd give these two a go. I repainted the test piece off camera just with a quick dry brush using these three paints and let it dry. I must admit I am a lot happier with the colours of the test piece now that I've repainted it. I feel that it definitely matches what I was looking for initially, and these I've decided are going to be the colours that I'm going to be using for the final model. Once I had made my final decision, I then started to attach the washing line to the actual model using exactly the same method. I was very pleased with the initial result, and even without painting I felt that it gave off the exact aesthetics that I was looking for, and it looked genuinely like a Guyver unit. So far I do feel that the Guyver unit is coming along rather nicely. However, there is clearly a lot of work yet to be done. I have still got to install the electronics, the lights and the sounds. I have got to complete installing the biological organism. I still have to paint the model and the control model, and also put on the outer protective casing. So if you want to see how this model turns out, see if I can harness the power of the Guyver unit, then hit the subscribe button now. Don't miss my next video, otherwise you'll end up being so annoyed that you missed it. So annoyed? The jokes do get better, I promise.